Thoughts. Cultivating Clarity Part I. So in the last couple of clips, I shared with you the importance of cultivating awareness to pause and notice the experiences of discomfort and choose responses purposefully based on what's important or needed rather than resorting to mindless reactions that are not useful. So in developing the skills to recognize our experiences of discomfort and work with them compassionately, awareness is the first step. Now, hopefully by now, you have had an opportunity to cultivate awareness by practicing mindfulness daily. Now, in the next few lessons, we will explore thoughts and emotions that arise within us. If you remember, emotions and thoughts are things that show up in our lives, but we don't necessarily have control over them. What we have control over is how we respond to the thoughts or emotions that show up. Sometimes, during challenging situations, we may have many thoughts spinning in our brain or have negative thoughts that prevent us from focusing on what's important to respond purposefully. So, in the next 3 lessons, we will be focusing on how to work with our own thoughts so that we can work with challenging circumstances with clarity, optimism, and self empathy. Further working on our skills to recognize our experiences of discomfort and working with them purposefully and compassionately. So let's start with a simple practice. For this practice, I invite you to close your eyes and slowly breathe in and out. Each time you complete a cycle of breathing in and out, you silently say to yourself 1. Then, when you complete the next cycle of breathing in and out, you say 2. Now continue this process until you get to 10. If you notice that you were distracted with a thought between 1 and 10, just simply go back to 1 and start again. So let's pause the video to do this practice and continue after 3 minutes or once you get to 10, whichever comes first. So what did you notice? Was that trickier than you thought? Did a thought or 2 or 3 visit you between 1 and 10? What were the kinds of thoughts that showed up? Maybe you were thinking about what you had for lunch and who you sat with, or making a list of the homework you need to do. Oftentimes we think we're in the present, but our mind is somewhere in the past or in the future in the form of thoughts. So, what are thoughts? Let's imagine that you are walking down the street and you see a friend coming your way. You wave hello to a friend, but the friend doesn't say anything to you with their head down and walks past you. What happened? You might say that maybe your friend is having a bad day. Or maybe you might have said something that made your friend upset. Maybe your friend had earphones in and listening to music and didn't hear you. Whatever answer you have, hold on to your explanation of what happened, because we'll come back to this later. Now, I want you to watch this video. So, what happened? Was there a family feud and the door was broken down? Was there a big bully in school? Or was a big triangle feeling lonely because they couldn't find a friend? Now, I'm going to ask you again, what happened? What happened was that there were two triangles moving and a circle moving. The lines moved as well. All the explanations before didn't actually happen. They were simply stories created by our brains. If you had a different explanation of what happened, that's a story as well. Our brains instantly make stories out of events. When you reflect back to the scenario about your friend walking past you, you also probably made up different stories of what happened. But the truth is, what happened was that you said hello and your friend didn't look up and didn't say hi to you and walked past you. That's all that happened. Everything else is a story. So our experiences are broadly classified into events and stories. Events are things we experience with our five senses: our sight, smell, hearing, touch, and taste. Stories are meanings we give to these events. Oftentimes, we mix up our experiences of events and stories and believe that stories are reality, which I will get more into in the future lessons. But with more keen awareness, we can separate our experiences of events and stories. Now, what do you recognize about stories? Well, oftentimes everyone has different stories of the same event. So, in the scenario of your friend walking past you and not looking up, when I ask my students in class about their interpretations of the event, I find that different people come up with different stories of the same event. Like the friend is mad at you, or the friend is having a bad day, or the friend is lost in thought. And the different stories are based on different experiences my students have had with their friends in the past. Now, sometimes multiple stories spin around in your head at once. So, in the same scenario of your friend walking past you and not looking up, you might also find that not only do multiple stories come up with different people, but also in one person's mind. Well, some stories are stickier than others. So, out of the multiple stories that show up in your mind, you might find that certain stories might feel more true than others and may dominate your mind. These stories can be sticky and can recur over and over, even after the event is over. Now, these stories that arise from various events in our lives show up in the form of thoughts. Thoughts are a powerful tool because you can think creatively or critically with your ability to form thoughts. But there are some problems also with thoughts. They're difficult to turn off when they're not needed anymore. They disconnect us from what's really going on, which are the events. So remember how thoughts came up when you were simply trying to count your breaths and disconnected you from this activity? And guess how many thoughts an average person has a day? 100? 1,000? Well, a person on average has over 50,000 thoughts a day. Isn't that crazy? It's hard to believe, but when we are not aware of them, thoughts can fill up our brain. So, what happens when our thoughts fill up our brain? When thoughts fill up our brain, we can be caught up in the past or the future, and they can prevent us from experiencing fully what's happening in the present, even if what we're experiencing is very important, like a friend sharing a concern, or a championship match for our soccer season, or taking our final exam. Our thoughts can also color the way we experience reality because our thoughts are deeply intertwined with the way we feel. So oftentimes we get caught up in a repeating cycle of emotions and thoughts. Certain thoughts may bring up certain emotions, and these emotions can reinforce certain thoughts, and the cycle can continue on and on. Now, this cycle can be triggered by any situation or an event. So, for example, if you lose our soccer match, a feeling of frustration might come up for you. Then, with this feeling, there might be a thought like, I hate what happened. Then, this thought may bring up more frustration, and the cycle goes on and on with a thought and an emotion reinforcing each other. Another example is a situation of getting a bad test score. Some of us may have experienced this in the past. Now, this might lead to you having a feeling of frustration, which then is accompanied by a thought of, why did I not work harder? Then this thought may bring up another feeling of guilt for not having worked harder, which feels bad inside you. So then is followed by a thought of, I don't want to feel this way. Then this thought might accentuate the feeling of frustration and the cycle continues. So, as you can see in these examples, when we experience certain situations, we are unconsciously captured in a cycle, and this cycle can determine our feelings, and attempting to not feel or think about it can get us more caught up than before. Now, these things occur unconsciously and often on autopilot. And with these certain situations, the same cycle can be built in as a habit with many years of repeated practices. So, in summary, our minds create stories about people and events, and these stories or thoughts get connected to feelings. These feelings can be pleasant or unpleasant or even neutral. Now, sometimes our minds replay these stories over and over even after the actual event is over, and they clog up our brain and make it harder for us to focus on what's important and needed. So, as I mentioned earlier, during challenging situations, we may have many thoughts spinning in our brain that prevent us from focusing on what's important to respond purposefully. And if this tendency is built deeply within us as a habit, it can make our experiences of challenges even more difficult. So in the next clip, as part 2 of Thoughts Cultivating Clarity, I will be sharing with you how we can apply a mindfulness practice to let go of thoughts, to declog our brain so that we can experience reality more clearly and we can bring our attention to what is important.